The so-called angry humans burst from their ships into the vacuum of space, racing toward the besieged Ocampa colony. Explosions flashed in the darkness, the ruthless Krill's warships tearing into the colony's defenses. Bruce Wells hunched over his drink in a dimly lit bar on Vortis Prime, the pale blue glow of bioluminescent liquor illuminating his rugged face. Chattering alien races filled the establishment, ignoring the lone human veteran who stared into his glass. A cluster of Ocampa colonists suddenly charged in, shouting about devastating Krill attacks on Rixis, their mining outpost. The room fell hushed at their panicked words, listening as they recounted unanswered distress calls and their meager fleet's inability to repel the assault. Bruce's hand clenched the glass as memories of battling the Krill flooded back. He slammed the drink down, his chair scraping loudly as he stood. The bar's patrons gaped at the human glowering before them. "Where's this colony?" Bruce growled. An Ocampa male named Vortis stammered a reply. "The Outer Rim, small mining outpost, Rixis. But it's too dangerous. The Krill will rip apart any ship that—" "Not my ship," Bruce cut in, a feral grin splitting his hardened face. "They haven't faced me yet." He stormed from the bar, the fate of the Ocampa colony, and thousands of lives now resting on his scarred shoulders. There would be no help from the skittish galactic community or fledgling Ocampa military. He was their only hope. Bruce gritted his teeth as he thundered toward the docking bay and his waiting warship. The Krill were in for a brutal surprise. This angry human was coming, and he would show no mercy until the colony was safe or he was dead. Bruce stormed through the crowded spaceport, his boots thudding against the metal deck. Vortis scrambled to keep pace with the human's long strides, nearly colliding with a group of chattering Zorgons. Bruce barely seemed to notice the commotion around him. His eyes locked on a battered freighter docked at the far end of the port. As they approached the ship, Bruce reached out and placed a calloused hand on the pitted hull. A flicker of warmth crossed his face as he gazed at the vessel. "The Andromeda," he said, his voice gruff with affection. "She's carried me through more scrapes than I can remember." Vortis eyed the ship dubiously, taking in the scorch marks and dents that marred its surface. "You're sure this ship can stand up to the Krill fleet?" A wry chuckle escaped Bruce's lips. "Looks can be deceiving. The Andromeda's got plenty of fight left in her." He strode up the ramp, Vortis trailing hesitantly behind. Inside, Bruce slid into the pilot's chair and began flipping switches and adjusting dials with the ease of long familiarity. Vortis watched, fascinated, as the human's hands danced over the unfamiliar controls. "I don't understand," Vortis said suddenly, his voice small in the confines of the cockpit. "Why are you willing to risk your life for a colony you've never even seen?" Bruce's hands stilled on the controls. For a long moment he stared out the viewport, his eyes distant. "I've watched the Krill slaughter too many innocents," he said at last, his voice heavy with old pain. "I made a vow to never let it happen again." He swiveled to face Vortis, his gaze boring into the Ocampa, "and I never break a promise." With that, he turned back to the controls and fired up the engines. The Andromeda roared to life, the deck plates thrumming beneath their feet. Vortis clutched at his seat as the ship blasted out of the port and into the star-strewn void. As the Andromeda hurtled through space, Vortis felt a spark of hope kindle in his chest. Perhaps this battle-scarred human, with his fierce determination and unbreakable promises, was exactly what they needed to face the Krill. Bruce and Vortis stared intently at the holographic display flickering before them, casting a pale blue glow across their faces. The map of Rixis colony rotated slowly, revealing the intricate layout of buildings and generators. Bruce leaned in, eyes narrowed as he studied the schematic. "See that?" He pointed to a large central structure. "That's the main power generator. If the Krill take that out, the whole colony goes dark. They'll be sitting ducks." Vortis nodded, his eyes wide as he took in Bruce's assessment. "What do we do?" Bruce zoomed in on a smaller building nestled near the colony's edge. "There, a backup generator. If we can keep that running, the colonists might stand a fighting chance." Suddenly, a shrill alarm pierced the air. Red light bathed the cockpit as Bruce bolted from his seat. "We're coming up on Rixie's," he called over his shoulder, Vortis scrambling to follow. Bruce slid into the pilot's chair, his hands already flying over the controls. Vortis gasped as the viewscreen lit up, revealing a swarm of angular black ships descending on the colony like locusts. Flashes of green laser fire rained down, exploding against the settlement's shields. With a defiant roar, Bruce sent the Andromeda hurtling toward the fray. The ship shuddered as its own weapons came to life, spitting bolts of searing energy at the krill vessels. Vortis clung to his seat, his heart pounding as Bruce wove the ship through a deadly lattice of laser fire. The Andromeda shook violently as a krill blast grazed its shields. Sparks flew from an overloaded console, but Bruce never flinched. His eyes remained locked on the viewscreen, his jaw set as he pushed the ship to its limits. With a final, dizzying roll, the Andromeda punched through the krill blockade. Bruce scanned the colony's surface, smoke rising from blackened craters. "There!" He jabbed a finger at a clearing near the backup generator. "We'll make our stand there." The ship dropped like a stone, slamming into the ground with a bone-jarring impact. Bruce was out of his seat in a flash, snatching up his weapons. He tossed a blaster to Vortis, who fumbled with the unfamiliar weapon. "Ever used one of these?" Bruce asked, a hint of a grin tugging at his lips. Bruce's grin widened. "Well, you're about to learn." He slapped the control panel and the Andromeda's ramp hissed open. Smoke and the sounds of battle poured into the ship. "Stay close," Bruce ordered, "and shoot anything that moves." Together they charged down the ramp and into the heart of the besieged colony. Laser fire sizzled past as they sprinted for cover, the acrid stench of burning metal filling their nostrils. Krill soldiers, their armor a dull, chitinous black, swarmed through the narrow streets. Bruce ducked behind a shattered wall, Vortis pressing close beside him. The human risked a glance around the edge, then pulled back as a barrage of laser fire scorched the ground where his head had been. "We've got to get to that generator," Bruce shouted over the din of battle. "Follow me and keep your head down." With a fierce battle cry, Bruce leapt from cover, his blaster spitting bolts of searing light at the advancing krill. Vortis gripped his own weapon tightly and charged after the human into the heart of the chaos. Bruce and Vortis charged through the colony's rubble-strewn streets, blaster fire sizzling overhead. Smoke choked the air, mingling with the terrified screams of fleeing Ocampa. Bruce moved with the lethal grace of a born warrior, his blaster spitting bolts of searing energy at the krill invaders with unerring accuracy. Vortis, his hands shaking on his unfamiliar weapon, managed to down a few of the insectoid soldiers, adrenaline and desperation fueling his aim. As they neared the squat, reinforced structure housing the backup generator, a fresh wave of krill warriors emerged from the shadows. Their black chitin armor glinted in the hellish light of the burning colony, razor-sharp claws flexing with deadly intent. Bruce skidded to a halt, his eyes darting between the advancing krill and the generator building. "Vortis, go," he barked, jerking his head towards the structure. "Get that generator running, I'll hold these bastards off." Vortis hesitated, torn between obeying Bruce's command and staying to fight at the human's side. Bruce fixed him with a stern glare, his eyes hard as flint. "Go, damn it! The colony won't last long without that generator." Swallowing his protest, Vortis turned and sprinted for the building, his heart pounding in his ears. Behind him, he heard Bruce's blaster roar to life once more, followed by the enraged hissing of the krill. Bruce stood his ground as the krill surged forward, a grim smile tugging at his lips. "Come on, you ugly bastards," he growled, his finger tightening on the trigger. "Let's dance." The krill attacked in a flurry of slashing claws and gnashing mandibles. Bruce wove through their onslaught, his blaster flashing as he fired shot after shot into the mass of chitin and hate. But for every krill that fell, two more seemed to take its place. A lucky blow caught Bruce across the chest, a razor-sharp claw tearing through his armor and drawing a line of fire across his skin. Gritting his teeth against the pain, Bruce staggered back, his free hand pressed to the wound. The krill pressed their advantage, forcing him back towards the crumbling wall of a ruined building. Bruce's blaster clicked empty, and he hurled it at the nearest krill with a defiant snarl. Just as the krill closed in for the kill, a series of explosions rocked the street. The aliens hissed in confusion, their heads swiveling to face the new threat. A group of Ocampa fighters poured into the street, their weapons blazing. At their head was Vortis, his face set with grim determination. "For Rixis," he yelled, his voice rising above the chaos. "For the Ocampa." A fierce grin split Bruce's blood-streaked face as he snatched up a fallen krill's weapon. With the Ocampa reinforcements at his back, he surged forward, the alien blaster spitting death at the krill ranks. The tide of battle had turned, but the fight was far from over. The krill fell back, their hissing cries echoing through the smoke-filled streets as Bruce and Vortis burst through the battered doors of the generator building, blasters at the ready. The acrid stench of smoke and scorched metal assaulted their nostrils as they took in the scene of destruction. The backup generator lay in ruins, sparks flying from its shattered casing, wires spilling out like the entrails of a gutted beast. Vortis sprinted to the control panel, his fingers a blur as they danced across the keys. "I might be able to get this heap running again," he shouted over the crackling of the damaged generator. "But I'm going to need a few minutes." Bruce nodded curtly, taking up position by the door. "You've got him." He tossed Vortis his spare blaster, "just in case those krill bastards come knocking." Outside, the sounds of battle reached a crescendo, the sizzle of laser fire and the cries of the wounded mingling in a hellish symphony. Bruce risked a glance through the shattered window and swore under his breath. A fresh wave of krill warriors was pouring into the colony, their chitinous armor glinting in the fiery light. He gritted his teeth, readying his blaster for another onslaught. Suddenly, a deafening roar shook the very foundations of the building. Bruce's head snapped up, his eyes widening as he saw a massive krill ship descending from the smoke-choked sky, its weapons glowing with malevolent energy. "Vortis," he bellowed, his voice barely audible over the din. "We've got company and they brought a big fucking gun." Vortis looked up from the generator, his face ashen. "I need more time, just a couple more minutes." Bruce's jaw tightened. "You'll get 'em." He charged out the door, a fierce battle cry tearing from his throat. His blaster spat bolts of searing light as he wove through the advancing krill, drawing their fire away from the generator building. The immense krill ship loomed overhead, its weapons glowing like the eyes of a demon. Bruce planted his feet, staring defiantly up at the behemoth. The ship's cannons flared, the air itself seeming to scream as they prepared to unleash hell. Just as Bruce braced for oblivion, a brilliant blue beam lanced out from behind him, striking the ship's underbelly. The vessel reeled back, smoke billowing from the impact site. More beams followed, a relentless barrage that sent the ship spinning out of control, its hull buckling under the onslaught. Bruce spun around to see Vortis standing in the doorway of the generator building, a fierce grin splitting his face. "The generator!" Vortis crowed, his voice triumphant. "It's powering the colony's defense grid." Together they watched as the colony's defenses hammered the krill ship, driving it back into the roiling sky. On the ground the krill warriors wavered, their resolve crumbling as they saw their flagship retreating. The Ocampa surged forward, their blasters singing a song of defiance as they drove the invaders back, step by bloody step. The tide of battle turned as Bruce and Vortis rallied the Ocampa warriors, leading a fierce charge against the krill invaders. Blaster fire lit up the smoke-choked streets as the defenders pushed forward, their courage bolstered by the humans' indomitable presence. The krill fell back hissing and screeching, driven towards their landing crafts by the relentless onslaught. Victory was within reach, when a shrill cry pierced the air. Bruce spun around to see a krill warrior clutching a young Ocampa child, its razor-sharp claws poised at the boy's throat. The alien hissed a challenge, daring Bruce to make a move. Bruce froze, his heart pounding. The child's terrified eyes met his, pleading for help. But Bruce knew that one wrong move could mean the boy's death. Slowly, he lowered his blaster. "All right," he said, his voice steady despite the tension coiled in his muscles. "You win. Let the kid go." The krill's mandibles twitched in a grotesque parody of a smile. It shoved the child roughly to the ground and advanced on Bruce, its claws glinting in the hellish light. Bruce stood his ground, hands raised in apparent surrender. The krill lunged, claws slashing towards the human's throat. At the last second, Bruce dropped to the ground, rolling under the alien's attack. In a flash, he drew a hidden knife from his boot and plunged it into the krill's unarmored underbelly. The krill screeched in agony, its claws flailing wildly. Bruce gritted his teeth and twisted the knife, driving it deeper into the alien's gut. Viscous dark blood poured over his hands as the krill thrashed and convulsed. With a final gurgling hiss, the creature went limp. Bruce staggered to his feet, breathing hard. He hurried to the Ocampa child's side and scooped the boy up in his arms. "You're okay," he murmured, his voice uncharacteristically gentle. "You're safe now." The child clung to him, sobbing into his shoulder. Bruce held the boy close, his eyes meeting Vortis's over the child's head. Vortis looked at Bruce with newfound respect, seeing past the human's gruff exterior to the compassionate heart beneath. In that moment, he understood that Bruce wasn't just a hardened warrior, but a protector, willing to risk everything for the innocent. With the child safe and the krill in full retreat, Bruce and Vortis rallied the Ocampa for one final push. They surged forward, blasters spitting fire, driving the invaders back to their ships. The krill fled, their ships lifting off one by one until the sky was clear. A cheer went up from the Ocampa as the last krill craft disappeared into the clouds. They had done it. They had defended their home against impossible odds, and they owed it all to the angry, stubborn, indomitable human who had given them the courage to fight. As the smoke of battle cleared, Bruce and Vortis found themselves amid the ruins of Rixie's colony. The Creel ships had fled, but the cost of victory was high. Buildings lay shattered, fires still smouldered, and the cries of the wounded filled the air. Bruce wiped sweat and grime from his brow, his eyes hard as he surveyed the devastation. "Come on," he said gruffly to Vortis. "There's work to do." Together they plunged into the wreckage, clearing rubble and searching for survivors. Bruce's strong hands lifted twisted metal and shattered stone, while Vortis's keen eyes spotted signs of life in the shadows. They worked tirelessly, side by side, human and Ocampa united in their determination to rebuild. As they labored, Bruce couldn't help but notice the change in the way the Ocampa looked at him. The fear and suspicion that had once clouded their eyes had given way to something else, gratitude, respect, even admiration. Days turned into weeks as the rebuilding continued. The colony slowly began to take shape again, new structures rising from the ashes of the old. And every evening, as the twin suns set over Rixis, Bruce and Vortis would join the other Ocampa around the campfire, sharing stories and drawing strength from each other's company. One night, as the flames crackled and the stars twinkled overhead, Vortis turned to Bruce, a question burning in his eyes. "Bruce," he said softly, "I think we've all been wondering, why did you come to help us? Why risk everything for a people not your own?" The other Ocampa fell silent, all eyes on the human. Bruce stared into the fire, the flickering light casting shadows across his weathered face. For a long moment he said nothing. Then, slowly, he began to speak. "I lost my own people," he said, his voice low and thick with emotion. "A long time ago, the krill destroyed my world, just like they tried to destroy yours." He looked up, meeting Vortis's gaze. "I couldn't let that happen again. Not when I had the power to stop it." A hush fell over the group, the weight of Bruce's words sinking in. The Ocampa looked at him with new eyes, seeing for the first time the pain and the purpose that drove him. Vortis reached out, laying a hand on Bruce's shoulder. "Your people would be proud of you," he said softly, "as we are proud to call you our friend." Bruce nodded, swallowing hard. In the firelight his eyes glistened with unshed tears. For the first time in years he felt a sense of belonging, of purpose. He had lost his home, but he had found a new one here, among the Ocampa. As the night wore on and the Ocampa began to drift off to their beds, Bruce remained by the fire, his mind alive with thoughts of the future. He knew this peace was fragile. The krill would return, stronger and more determined than ever to wipe out the Ocampa. But they would be ready. He would make sure of it. He would train them, teach them everything he knew about fighting and surviving. And when the Krill came again, he would stand with the Ocampa, fighting for their lives and their freedom, for as long as he drew breath. For he was Bruce Wells, the angry human, the defender of the Ocampa, and he would never stop fighting for what was right. As the dust of battle settled, Bruce threw himself into preparing the Ocampa for the inevitable return of the Krill. Day after day, he drilled them in the art of war, teaching them to fire blasters with deadly accuracy, to fight hand-to-hand with ferocity and skill, and to think like soldiers. Vortis became his right hand, his keen mind absorbing Bruce's teachings like a sponge. Together they fortified the colony's defenses, setting up perimeter alarms and escape routes, preparing for the worst. But even as they readied for war, life slowly returned to the battered colony. The Ocampa, ever resilient, rebuilt their shattered homes and reopened their shops. Laughter began to echo through the streets once more. And amidst the bustle of rebuilding, something unexpected blossomed. Vortis introduced Bruce to his sister Arya, a brilliant engineer with fierce eyes and a sharp tongue. At first, Bruce was his usual gruff self, brushing off Arya's attempts at conversation. But her quick wit and razor intellect soon broke through his defenses. They found themselves working side by side, reinforcing the colony's defenses, and as they worked, they talked. Bruce found himself telling Arya things he'd never told anyone, about his homeworld, about the war that had taken everything from him, and Arya listened, her eyes soft with understanding. Slowly, almost without realizing it, they fell into a rhythm. Meals shared in quiet corners, walks taken under the stars, a brush of hands as they pored over defense plans, a lingering glance across a crowded room. "You know," she said softly, "before you came I didn't think one person could make a difference, but you've changed everything. You've given us hope." Bruce felt his throat tighten. He was a man of action, not words, but in that moment he wanted to tell Arya what she meant to him, how she made him feel alive in a way he hadn't in years. Instead, he reached out and took her hand, his calloused fingers intertwining with hers. "I'm just doing what's right," he said gruffly, "what anyone would do." Arya turned to him, her eyes shining in the starlight. "No," she said, "not anyone, you." And then she was kissing him, her lips soft and urgent against his. Bruce pulled her close, losing himself in the feel of her, the scent of her hair, the warmth of her skin. For a moment the galaxy fell away. There was no war, no Krill, no death. There was only this, only them, two hearts beating as one under the endless sky. But even as Bruce lost himself in Arya's embrace, a part of him couldn't shake the feeling that this peace was fleeting. Out there, in the cold depths of space, the Krill were plotting their revenge, and they would not rest until the Ocampa and the human who had dared to stand against them were nothing more than ashes and dust. The future was uncertain, the path ahead shadowed with danger. But for now, for this one perfect moment, Bruce let himself hope. Hope for a future with Arya by his side. Hope for a life beyond the endless cycle of war and death. Bruce jolted awake, his heart pounding, sweat beading his brow. Something was wrong, he could feel it in his bones. He leapt from his bed, snatching up his blaster and bursting out into the night. Bruce sprinted through the streets, dodging rubble and laser fire. He spotted Vortis rallying a group of Ocampa warriors and raced to join them. Together, Bruce and Vortis led the charge, their blasters spitting fire at the advancing Krill. But there were too many. For every Krill that fell, 3 more took its place. In the chaos of battle, Bruce lost sight of Vortis. He spun around, frantically searching for his friend, but all he could see was smoke and laser fire. Bruce's blood ran cold. He charged towards the sound, his heart in his throat. He burst into a clearing and saw Arya, cornered by a group of Krill warriors, their claws raised to strike. Bruce didn't hesitate. He leapt into the fray, his blaster firing, his fists flying. He took down the Krill one by one, his anger and his desperation fueling him. But there were too many. A Krill blade sliced into Bruce's side and he staggered, his vision blurring. He heard Arya scream his name, but it sounded distant, muffled. As he fell to his knees, the krill closing in for the kill, a sudden bright light illuminated the battlefield. Bruce squinted against the glare, trying to make out the source. What he saw took his breath away. Hovering above the colony, its weapons charged and ready, was a human battleship. And emblazoned on its side, in bold letters, was a single word: hope. The ship opened fire, its advanced weaponry cutting through the krill like a scythe through wheat. The krill scattered, their formation broken, their courage shattered. As the human ship touched down and a squad of soldiers poured out, Bruce felt a smile spread across his face. He wasn't alone. He had never been alone. For he was human, and the humans had come to the rescue once again. The battleship's ramp lowered with a hiss, and a squad of human soldiers charged out, their weapons blazing. They cut through the krill ranks, their advanced armor deflecting the aliens' laser fire. Bruce struggled to his feet, one hand pressed to his bleeding side. Arya was at his side in an instant, supporting him. "Bruce," she cried, her voice thick with fear and relief. "Thank the stars, I thought." One of the human soldiers, a grizzled veteran with a scar across his cheek, approached them. "Bruce Wells?" At Bruce's nod, the soldier saluted. "Captain Nathaniel Hawke, UNSC Retribution. We picked up your distress signal." Bruce's eyes widened. He hadn't sent a distress signal. He glanced at Arya, who smiled sheepishly. "I sent it," she admitted. "When we were fortifying the colony, I thought it couldn't hurt to have backup." Bruce felt a surge of affection for this brilliant, brave Ocampa woman. He took her hand and squeezed it, conveying his gratitude. Captain Hawke was surveying the battlefield, his face grim. "Looks like we got here just in time. My men will secure the perimeter. We'll get your wounded on the ship, and then—" A deafening roar cut him off. A massive krill warship, larger than any Bruce had ever seen, was descending through the atmosphere. Its weapons were already charging, a sickly green glow emanating from its hull. Bruce pulled Arya close as a blinding green beam lanced from the krill ship, carving a path of destruction through the colony. Buildings vaporized, the ground quaked, and the air itself seemed to scream. The human ship rocked violently as the beam grazed its shields. Alarms blared, red lights flashing. Bruce looked at Arya, saw the fear and determination warring in her eyes. He looked at Hawke, at the human soldiers fighting and dying to protect a colony not their own. And he made a decision. The dreadnought's beam carved through the human ship's shields, alarms blaring as the vessel shuddered under the onslaught. In the chaos, Bruce met Arya's eyes, a split second of understanding passing between them. He knew what he had to do. With a grunt of pain, Bruce pushed himself to his feet, Arya supporting him as he swayed. Around them the human soldiers rallied, their weapons blazing as they drove the krill back. The tide of the battle was turning, the krill's resolve crumbling in the face of the humans' superior firepower. But even as hope surged in Bruce's chest, a flicker of movement caught his eye. A lone krill warrior, its armor scorched and battered, leveled its blaster at the human commander's unprotected back. Bruce didn't hesitate. With a burst of speed, he lunged forward, throwing himself between the krill and the commander. The laser blast struck him square in the chest, searing through his armor and into his flesh. Agony exploded through him as he crumpled to the ground, the acrid stench of burnt skin filling his nostrils. "Bruce!" Arya's scream tore through the din of battle as she fell to her knees beside him. Fortis was there a heartbeat later, his face ashen as he took in the extent of Bruce's injuries. The human commander knelt on Bruce's other side, his eyes wide with shock and sorrow. "Why?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "Why would you do that?" Bruce coughed, the taste of blood thick on his tongue. "Because," he rasped, each word an effort, "it's what we do. We protect. We fight. We stand." With trembling fingers, he reached out and grasped the commander's hand. "Promise me," he whispered, his voice fading. "Promise me you'll help them, the Ocampa. They need you." Tears glistened in the commander's eyes as he nodded, his grip tightening on Bruce's hand. "I promise," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "On my life, I promise." A smile tugged at the corners of Bruce's mouth, even as the world began to blur at the edges. "Good," he breathed. "That's good." His eyes found Arya's, and in them he saw a lifetime of possibilities, of love, of a future that could have been. "Arya," he murmured, his voice barely audible over the sounds of the fading battle. But the words died on his lips as the last of his strength ebbed away. His hand went slack in the commander's grasp, his eyes drifting shut. With a final, shuddering breath, Bruce Wells, the angry human, the defender of the Ocampa, the hero of Rixis, slipped away. Arya's anguished cry echoed across the battlefield, a sound of pure, raw grief. She gathered Bruce's still form into her arms, her tears falling like rain onto his blood-stained face. Vortis placed a hand on her shoulder, his own eyes brimming with sorrow. Around them, the battle drew to a close, the last of the krill falling before the humans' relentless onslaught. But the victory was a hollow one, the price paid too high. The Ocampa and the humans alike mourned the fallen hero. They carried his body to a quiet spot overlooking the colony, a place where the twin suns cast their warm light and the wind whispered through the tall grass. There they laid him to rest, a simple stone marking the spot where he lay. As the human ship prepared to depart, the Ocampa gathered to say their farewells. Arya stood at the forefront, her eyes red-rimmed, but her head held high. "We will never forget," she said, her voice carrying across the assembled crowd. "We will never forget the sacrifice he made, the hope he gave us. Bruce Wells will live on in our hearts, in our stories, in our fight, always." The commander stepped forward, his hand outstretched. "And in ours," he said solemnly. "The humans will not forget. We will honor his memory, and we will stand with the Ocampa, now and always." As the ship lifted off, its engines roaring to life, the Ocampa turned their faces to the sky. They watched until the vessel vanished into the stars, carrying with it the promise of a brighter tomorrow. For though the galaxy was vast and filled with perils, they knew now that they were not alone. They had an ally, a friend, in the most unexpected of places. They had the humans, and the humans, as they had proven time and time again, would always come to the rescue. The Ocampa turned back to their shattered colony, their hearts heavy with grief, but alight with a new sense of purpose. They had work to do, a home to rebuild, a future to forge. But as they set about their tasks, as they began to clear the rubble and tend to the wounded, they carried with them the memory of the human who had changed everything. Bruce Wells, the angry human, the defender of the Ocampa, the hero of Rixis. His story had come to an end, but his legacy was just beginning. In the hearts and minds of the Ocampa, in the tales they would tell their children and their children's children, he would live on. A symbol of courage, of sacrifice, of the unbreakable bond between two species who had found each other across the stars. And so, as the Ocampa rebuilt and the humans returned to the stars, the story of Bruce Wells became legend, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, even against the most impossible of odds, hope could be found. That a single person, a single act of bravery, could change the course of history. The Ocampa would face many trials in the years to come. The krill would return, as would other threats, other dangers, but they would face them with their heads held high, with the knowledge that they were not alone, that they had friends, allies, heroes. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.